Is the Fed losing its independence? Will tariffs hurt your wallet? Supreme Court immigration ruling in question? Is society losing faith in its future? Could surveillance soon touch your doorstep? How is consumer confidence? And are we stepping into the economic reality? We've got all the goods for today's 7 developing headlines. Welcome to US Daily News Brief. It's Jordan and Emery in the studio. Drop a comment and tell us what kind of headlines you want us to research and bring to you. Let's start with the Supreme Court. Just days ago, the court lifted restrictions on immigration stops in Los Angeles, allowing ICE to resume what critics call roving patrols. Now, this ruling means agents can stop and question people based on suspicion alone: appearance, language, neighborhood, things that many say open the door to racial profiling. Supporters argue it gives law enforcement more flexibility to crack down on illegal immigration. But Emery, this ruling is already drawing fire.
Exactly, Jordan. Civil liberties groups say this ruling undermines Fourth Amendment protections. The Guardian reports that many residents in immigrant-heavy communities already feel targeted, and this decision only heightens that fear. On the other hand, some lawmakers argue that enforcement without restrictions is necessary for border security, even in cities far from the border like Los Angeles. But here's the kicker. If this model works in LA, we could see it replicated nationwide. So the question is, are we protecting borders or eroding civil rights?
And speaking of erosion, let's talk about your wallet, because tariffs are back in the headlines. President Trump's latest tariff moves are sparking global backlash. Just this week, the administration slapped new tariffs on imported vehicles, tech components, and even certain household goods. The AP reports that allies from Europe to South Korea are sounding alarms, while American automakers are bracing for price hikes. Emery, the question for every viewer right now is simple. Will these tariffs make everyday life more expensive?
Yes, Jordan, and the answer seems to be yes. Tariffs are essentially a hidden tax. Companies pay more to import goods, and those costs usually get passed directly to consumers. Think about cars, smartphones, even appliances. Reuters notes that Hyundai, Toyota, and even Apple suppliers are preparing to raise U.S. prices. Supporters of tariffs argue they protect American jobs, but critics say they often lead to higher costs without the promised job growth. And Jordan, when consumers feel squeezed, that ripples through the entire economy.
And that brings us to the one institution that's supposed to steady the ship, the Federal Reserve. But is the Fed losing its independence? For decades, the Federal Reserve was seen as above politics, focused only on keeping inflation in check and stabilizing the economy. But under Trump, we're seeing more political influence creeping into Fed decisions. Some analysts argue the Fed is being pressured to keep interest rates low to juice the economy ahead of the 2026 elections. Emery, independence has always been the Fed's shield. Is that shield cracking?
It really looks like it. The New Yorker recently noted that Trump's economic agenda, what he calls Maganomics, isn't delivering the growth he promised, so pressure on the Fed has grown. Normally, the Fed raises rates when inflation climbs, but now, despite red-hot prices in some sectors, rates are being held steady. Critics say this is less about sound economics and more about political survival. If the Fed loses credibility, markets could panic. And Jordan, that ties directly to how people feel about the future of society itself.
Right. And polls show society's faith in its future may be slipping faster than the Fed can print money. A new Gallup poll shows support for capitalism has dropped to historic lows, while interest in socialism is creeping up, especially among younger Americans. The New York Post highlighted that while most still view socialism negatively, the idea of capitalism as the unshakable engine of the American dream is losing ground. Emery, is society losing its faith in the future?
Honestly, Jordan, yes. This isn't just about economics, it's about vibes. A lot of people feel left out of the so-called prosperity. Wages aren't keeping up, housing is out of reach, and debt is climbing. So when younger generations see billionaires multiplying wealth while they struggle with rent, they start looking for alternatives. But here's the tension. Americans still want opportunity. They're just not sure the current system delivers it anymore. And Jordan, That disillusionment is exactly what fuels interest in more control, sometimes through technology.
And that takes us to surveillance, because what's being tested in one US city could be the blueprint for all. There's been a quiet but alarming military deployment in Chicago. Reports suggest this isn't about protests or riots. It's about testing new forms of urban surveillance and control. We're talking about cameras, drones, and data systems integrated directly into civilian infrastructure. Emery, is Chicago becoming a test lab for future America?
That's exactly the fear. Advanced surveillance systems are being tied into traffic lights, public transport, and even utilities, all under the banner of preparedness. Critics say this is a dangerous expansion of government control. Supporters claim it's about safety and efficiency. But if it works in Chicago, it won't stop there. It could roll out nationwide. The AP has hinted that this is the first large-scale domestic test of such tech. And when people feel watched, their confidence changes, leading us to the next headline.
So let's talk about confidence, consumer confidence. MarketWatch reports only about 25% of Americans believe their economic future will improve, while nearly 70% doubt the American dream is alive. That's a staggering collapse in optimism. Consumer confidence is critical. It drives spending, which fuels growth. Emery, if people don't believe in the dream anymore, what happens to the economy?
It spirals. When people are pessimistic, they save more and spend less. Businesses then cut back, which means fewer jobs and slower growth. Economists call this a self-fulfilling recession. What's even scarier is that the fundamentals, like GDP and inflation, aren't catastrophic right now. But vibes matter. If people feel like things are bad, that mood can drag the real economy down. And that, Jordan, is where we hit our last headline. Are we already stepping in economic reality?
Well, Emery, some analysts are calling this moment a vibe session, where perception becomes reality. The Washington Post noted that despite steady numbers, hiring is slowing, layoffs are ticking up, and companies like Alphabet and Nvidia are seeing wild stock swings. Emery, is the US economy already in recession, even if the data says otherwise?
I'd say we're in a gray zone. The data may not scream recession yet, but the lived experience of many Americans sure does. When your grocery bill keeps rising, your rent eats half your paycheck, and your job feels shaky, that feels like recession, regardless of charts. The Fed, tariffs, surveillance, confidence, it all ties together into one big question. Do Americans still trust the system to work for them? That's the battle playing out in real time.
And that wraps today's 7 headlines shaping US politics and the economy. Now it's your turn. Do you think America is heading toward a real recession? Or is this just bad vibes becoming worse reality? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe to US Daily News Brief for fast, clear, and bold updates. Until next time, it's Jordan and Emery signing off.